We're going to talk about a woman who, without beauty, without a title, and without a penny of inherited wealth, clawed her way to the absolute pinnacle of global society and reigned there, undisputed, for nearly 50 years. A woman who could convince a hardened industrialist to play leapfrog with a duchess and make them both think it was their own brilliant idea. A woman who once filled the grand ballroom of the Waldorf-Astoria with live farm animals, purely for the hell of it. Her name was Elsa Maxwell, and she was the undisputed, uncrowned, and utterly fabulous queen of high society. Now, I need you to banish any image you might have of a delicate, waif-like creature draped in pearls, whispering pleasantries in a sun-dappled drawing room. Elsa was short, stout, and possessed a face that she herself, with characteristic and disarming honesty, compared to a bulldog. In an era when a woman's currency was her beauty and her dowry, Elsa possessed neither. She was born in Keokuk, Iowa, a place so far removed from the epicenters of power and glamour, it might as well have been on the moon. And yet, for the better part of the 20th century, this woman held the entire glittering world, from Hollywood royalty to actual royalty, in the palm of her hand. How? By what magical alchemical process did she achieve this impossible feat? The answer is both deceptively simple and dizzyingly complex. She threw parties. But please, don't you dare let your mind settle on that simple phrase. Don't just think rich lady throwing parties. That's far too simple, far too pedestrian for a creature like Elsa. Her soirees weren't just events. They were grand theatrical productions. They were spectacles, each one a meticulously crafted chapter in a grand, sometimes perplexing novel of her own making. A novel where the plot was a whirlwind of joyful, unpredictable chaos. The characters were a living, breathing who's who of global power and fame, and the author was always, always in control. To receive an invitation from Elsa Maxwell was not just a summons to a dinner or a dance. It was a ticket to a different reality, a temporary escape from the dreary strictures of the everyday world. Imagine for a moment you are a titan of industry in 1920s Paris, a man accustomed to the solemn rituals of boardrooms and the predictable waltz of formal society dinners. You receive an embossed card from this strange, loud American woman. The invitation doesn't request your presence at a ball. It enlists you in a citywide treasure hunt. Suddenly, you and your wife, dripping in couture and diamonds, are piling into your Rolls-Royce, clutching a cryptic clue, and racing through the streets of Paris trying to find a black swan at the Jardin des Plantes, or coaxing a shoelace from a famous but bewildered opera singer. You are competing against the Aga Khan, a smattering of Russian Grand Dukes, and that brilliant young songwriter, Cole Porter. For one night, you are not a captain of industry. You are a child again, caught up in a glorious, ridiculous adventure. That was the magic of Elsa. She didn't just entertain you, she transformed you. Or picture this, it's the height of the Great Depression in New York. The world outside is gray, anxious, and fearful. But you have an invitation to Elsa's barnyard follies at the Waldorf. You step out of the bleak reality of the city streets and into a ballroom that has been miraculously converted into a rustic farm. There are hay bales stacked against the gilded walls. The scent of fresh-cut grass hangs in the air, and tethered to ornate posts are actual, living cows, sheep, and even a donkey or two. The cream of society, men and women whose names are synonymous with wealth and power, are sipping vintage champagne from tin cups and attempting to milk a cow, often for the first time in their cosseted lives. The sheer, audacious absurdity of it all is intoxicating. It's a joke, a spectacle, a piece of performance art, and a declaration of war against the solemnity of the times. It's pure, unadulterated Elsa. She was the original influencer, the godmother of experiential marketing, a full-fledged celebrity long before the term became so diluted. Her syndicated gossip column, Elsa Maxwell's Party Line, was devoured by millions, offering them a tantalizing glimpse into a world of impossible glamour. Her every move was chronicled in the press. She could make or break a restaurant, a fashion trend, or a person's social standing with a single well-placed comment. She was a confidant to kings. The Duke of Windsor was a dear friend, and a den mother to Hollywood legends like Marilyn Monroe, Rita Hayworth, and Maria Callas. She was a formidable power broker. She operated not from a boardroom, but from her favorite banquette at the Stork Club or El Morocco, armed only with a telephone and an address book that was the envy of every diplomat and spy in the world. Yet, here's the delicious twist, the central poignant paradox of Elsa Maxwell's life, a truth captured in a single venomous remark by the one man who dared to challenge her reign. His name was Truman Capote, a literary wunderkind and a social climber of prodigious talent and terrifying ambition. He too sought to conquer society, but with very different weapons, intimacy and betrayal. He watched Elsa's grand productions with a cool, analytical eye, and once cuttingly observed Elsa's parties were like novels. Many chapters were meaningless. And in that one, perfectly aimed stiletto of a sentence, Capote pierced the very heart of the beautiful, tragic, and utterly fascinating truth of Elsa Maxwell. What did he mean by meaningless? Was he simply dismissing her life's work as frivolous, a collection of empty calories for the idle rich? Or was he pointing to something deeper, something more profound about the nature of her grand performance? Was this relentless whirl of scavenger hunts, costume balls, and champagne-fueled absurdity a genuine expression of a life lived to the fullest? Or was it a frantic, desperate attempt to fill a void, a magnificent, noisy spectacle designed to keep the silence at bay? Was she a benevolent bringer of joy, or a master manipulator using festivity as a tool for power and self-preservation? For all the thousands of people she entertained, for all the famous friends she collected like precious jewels, who truly knew the woman behind the carefully constructed facade of the world's greatest hostess. She built an empire dedicated to bringing people together, yet often confessed to a profound, gnawing loneliness. The novel of her life was filled with a cast of thousands, but the protagonist remained elusive, even perhaps to herself. She built a universe designed to banish boredom, her self-proclaimed mortal enemy, yet one has to wonder if she was ever truly at peace within it. To understand her, we have to read between the lines of the guest lists. We have to listen for the whispers behind the raucous laughter and the popping of corks. We have to try to find the real Elsa in the quiet, echoing moments after the last guest had finally gone home, when the farm animals had been trucked away and the ballroom was littered with the confetti and casualties of manufactured joy. The story of Elsa Maxwell is not just the story of great parties. It's the story of a woman who looked at the world, saw that it didn't have a place for someone like her, and so decided to build a new world of her own design. A world more colorful, more exciting, and infinitely more fun. It is the story of the price she paid for that creation, and the question of what, in the end, it all truly meant. So let's turn to the first page, shall we? Back to a time and a place that could not have been further from the gilded ballrooms she would one day command. A time of immense change, a world on the brink, where a girl with nothing but ambition and a prodigious talent for invention could begin to sketch the blueprints for a legend. To truly grasp the sheer high-wire audacity of Elsa Maxwell's life, we need to do more than just glance at the era she was born into. We need to wind the clock back and plunge ourselves headfirst into its strange, contradictory currents. We need to understand the world that was meant to crush a person like her, the rigid, gilded cage she was never supposed to enter, let alone rule. Welcome to America's Gilded Age. The name itself, gifted to the era by Mark Twain, was a masterpiece of cynical poetry. It wasn't a golden age, it was merely gilded, coated in a shimmering paper-thin layer of gold that concealed a foundation of iron, sweat, and often brutal exploitation. It was an age of magnificent, almost violent contrast. On one side, you had the rise of the robber barons, men with names that still echo in the halls of power and philanthropy: Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Morgan. These weren't just rich men. They were titans, modern-day Caesars, who commanded empires of steel, oil, railroads, and finance. They bent the continent to their will, laying thousands of miles of track, building factories that belched fire and smoke into the sky, and amassing fortunes so vast they defied human comprehension. John D. Rockefeller, the master of Standard Oil, became the world's first billionaire at a time when the average American worker earned a few $100s a year. Andrew Carnegie's steel mills armed the nation and built its cities, making him one of the wealthiest men on the planet. These men were living embodiments of a new, ruthless strain of American ambition, often justified by the popular philosophy of social Darwinism, a belief that in the jungle of the marketplace, only the fittest, the most cunning and powerful, were destined to survive and thrive. Their new wealth was explosive, dynamic, and in the eyes of the established order, profoundly, unforgivably vulgar. Because on the other side of this grand societal divide stood old money. This was the entrenched aristocracy of the East Coast, families based primarily in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, whose wealth was older, quieter, and derived from land, shipping, and banking. These were the Astors, the Van Rensselaers, the Stuyvesants, families who could trace their lineage back to the colonial era. They saw themselves not as businessmen, but as a kind of American nobility. Their power was not just financial, it was social, and it was absolute. And the undisputed empress of this realm, the high priestess of its arcane rituals, was a woman of terrifying authority named Carolyn Schermerhorn Astor, known to the world simply as the Mrs. Astor. Mrs. Astor's New York was a fortress, and she was its gatekeeper. Her power was wielded not with armies or edicts, but with guest lists. With the help of her foppish but influential Chamberlain Ward McAllister, she created the ultimate symbol of social exclusivity, the 400. This was the supposed number of people who could fit into her ballroom on Fifth Avenue, and by extension, the only people who truly mattered in American society. To be one of the 400 was to have arrived. To be excluded was to be a non-entity, a ghost haunting the periphery of polite society, no matter how many millions you had in the bank. The war between the nouveau riche Vanderbilts and the old guard Astors was the stuff of legend, a multi-year campaign of strategic ball-throwing and social maneuvering that was followed by the press with the same breathless intensity as a military conflict. This was a world of suffocating etiquette. There were unspoken rules for everything: the correct way to leave a calling card, the precise hour at which one could visit another, the topics that were permissible for dinner conversation, the people you could and could not acknowledge in public. It was a beautiful, suffocating, gilded cage, and its inhabitants valued pedigree and propriety above all else. Now I want you to hold that image in your mind, the glittering high-stakes battlefield of New York society. And then I want you to travel, in your imagination, 1,000 miles west, cross the Appalachian Mountains, traverse the rolling hills of Ohio and Indiana, and come to rest in the small river port of Keokuk, Iowa, nestled on a bend of the mighty Mississippi. It is here, in 1883, in a world utterly removed from Mrs. Astor's ballroom, that our story truly begins with the birth of Elsa Maxwell. Her father was a prosperous insurance salesman and a newspaper owner, a respected man in his community. Her mother was a proper Southern lady. The Maxwells were comfortable, but they were a universe away from the titans of the East. There was no family crest, no inherited fortune, no box at the opera. Elsa's childhood was one of provincial respectability, a life that was supposed to lead to a sensible marriage and a quiet existence as a wife and mother. But fate and her father's ambition had other plans. The Maxwell family didn't stay in Iowa. Like so many others, they looked west, to the land of opportunity, and moved to San Francisco. And it is here, in the vibrant, chaotic, and gloriously unsnobbish city of the Golden Gate, that the true character of Elsa Maxwell was forged. San Francisco at the turn of the century was a different beast entirely from New York. It was a city born of the gold rush, a place built on grit, luck, and relentless optimism. Its aristocracy was younger, its rules were looser, and its social landscape was a thrilling free-for-all. Personality and talent could take you much further in San Francisco than a Dutch surname ever could in New York. The city throbbed with a raw, creative energy. It had grand opera houses that attracted international stars, a raucous vaudeville circuit along the infamous Barbary Coast, and a thriving bohemian scene of artists and writers. This was Elsa's university. She wasn't a pretty child. By her own account, she was a roly-poly girl with a booming voice and an irrepressible energy. In the stifling atmosphere of an East Coast finishing school, she would have been an object of ridicule, relentlessly corrected and polished into a state of miserable conformity. But in the more forgiving climate of San Francisco, her eccentricities were allowed to flourish. She discovered very early on that she possessed a remarkable, almost prodigious talent for the piano. She didn't just play the notes, she attacked them, she inhabited them, she performed them with a flair and a showmanship that was astonishing in a child. It was at the keyboard that she first tasted the intoxicating power of holding a room in the palm of her hand, of commanding the attention of adults. It was her first weapon. While other girls her age were learning the delicate arts of needlepoint and watercolor, Elsa was devouring the world of professional entertainment. She haunted the city's theaters, studying the timing of the vaudeville comedians, the stage presence of the opera singers, the dramatic flair of the great actresses. She wasn't just watching, she was dissecting, analyzing, absorbing the techniques of creating an illusion and captivating an audience. Then, in 1906, when Elsa was in her early 20s, that world was literally shattered. The great San Francisco earthquake and the subsequent fires devastated the city, leveling its grand buildings and turning its bustling streets into a landscape of ruin. For Elsa, it was a terrifying, formative experience. It was a dramatic, real-world demonstration of how quickly an established order could crumble, how fortunes could be wiped out in an instant, and how life could be utterly unpredictable. But she also witnessed the city's incredible spirit of resilience, the way its people immediately began to rebuild, to create a new reality out of the ashes. The lesson was seared into her soul. Nothing is permanent, and survival belongs to the adaptable, the resilient, and the inventive. As a young woman, she tried to make her way in the world of the stage. She played piano in the flickering darkness of Nickelodeons, providing the soundtrack for silent films. She worked as an accompanist for singers in smoky vaudeville houses. She even tried her hand at writing songs and musical comedies, achieving a modest, fleeting success. But it became clear that she was never going to be a star in the conventional sense. She lacked the looks, the voice, the specific kind of magnetism that the footlights demanded. The rejection could have been crushing. It could have sent her scurrying back to a life of conventional obscurity. But for Elsa, it was a moment of profound, if painful, clarification. She later reflected on this period with her typical lack of self-pity, recognizing that her failure as a performer was the single most important event of her life. It forced her to pivot, to channel her formidable ambition in a new direction. She had learned the mechanics of entertainment from the inside out. She understood timing, pacing, and casting. She knew how to manage the fragile egos of performers. She knew how to build a program, how to create an atmosphere, how to generate a buzz. She was slowly, perhaps unconsciously, realizing that her greatest talent wasn't for being the star on the stage, but for creating the entire show. The stage itself was too small for her. She needed a bigger one, a grander one. The world was changing. The suffocating Victorian era was giving way to the faster, more modern Edwardian age. The First World War would soon arrive, shattering the old European order and creating a new, fluid international society. A generation was growing tired of the stuffy, predictable rituals of their parents. They were hungry for novelty, for excitement, for a bit of joyful, elegant chaos. The world, in short, was practically begging for someone like Elsa Maxwell to come along and turn the whole Gilded Cage upside down. She had completed her apprenticeship. It was time to go to work. So we leave our protagonist, Elsa Maxwell, standing on the threshold of a new life. Her apprenticeship in the raucous anything-goes world of San Francisco theater is complete. She has failed to become a star performer, but in that failure, she has discovered her true vocation. She is not an actress. She is an impresario. She possesses a Ph.D. in the science of entertainment and a burning, unquenchable ambition. But where can she build her stage? America, for all its dynamism, is still in the grip of the old guard. The fortresses of New York and Boston society are still too high, their walls too thick. For a woman with no money, no family connections, and no conventional beauty, a frontal assault would be suicide. So she makes a decision that is as audacious as it is strategic. She turns her back on the new world and sets her sights on the old. She gambles everything on Europe. Her arrival was not that of a wealthy heiress on a grand tour. It was more akin to a one-woman invasion force with a slim wallet and a surplus of nerve. Her first beachhead was London, the majestic beating heart of a fading empire. Edwardian London was a city of rigid hierarchies, a place where one's accent, one's school, and one's family name determined one's destiny. It was ruled by a clique of powerful society hostesses, women like the fabulously wealthy American expatriate Emerald Cunard and the relentlessly ambitious Sybil Colfax, who competed fiercely to land the most impressive lions for their salons, prime ministers, celebrated artists, and literary giants. Into this formal, structured world waltzed Elsa, a loud, witty, bulldog-faced American who played the piano like a demon and seemed utterly unimpressed by titles and tradition. She was a curiosity, a gust of fresh, unpretentious air in a stuffy room. Her method was simple, but effective. She used her one marketable skill, her piano playing, as a social crowbar. She might get invited to a stuffy salon as a hired entertainer, expected to provide a pleasant musical backdrop. But Elsa never did anything in the background. She would finish her piece, then swing around on the piano stool, and with a booming voice and a mischievous grin, proceed to take over the entire evening. She'd tell outrageous, often slightly embellished stories about her Wild West upbringing in San Francisco. She'd lead the assembled lords and ladies in a surprisingly rowdy sing-along of American ragtime tunes. She had an almost magical ability to puncture pomposity without causing offense. A crusty old duke, prepared to be bored for 3 hours, would suddenly find himself laughing until tears streamed down his face. She wasn't just an entertainer. She was a catalyst, a human chemical agent who could transform a dull gathering into an actual party. Word began to spread about this strange, brilliant American woman. She wasn't just invited to parties anymore. She was sought after. But London was only a rehearsal. It was in Paris, in the giddy, shell-shocked, creatively explosive aftermath of the First World War, that Elsa Maxwell found her true stage and perfected her art form. The Great War had been a meat grinder, consuming a generation of young men and shattering the continent's faith in the old order. The Roaring Twenties in Paris was a response to that trauma. It was a decade-long fever dream of frantic, desperate joy. It was a city teeming with American expatriates, the lost generation of writers like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, Russian nobles fleeing the revolution, artists like Picasso and Dali, and a European aristocracy determined to dance away the ghosts of the past. There was a hunger for novelty, for distraction, for anything that felt new and alive. The city was a powder keg of creative and social energy, and Elsa Maxwell had arrived with the match. It was here that she decided to launch a direct assault on her greatest enemy, boredom. She looked at the typical society party, the stilted conversations, the rigid seating charts, the predictable progression from cocktails to dinner to dancing, and declared war. Her weapon of choice was an idea so simple, so childishly brilliant. It would change the face of entertaining forever: the scavenger hunt. Today it seems commonplace, but in the Paris of the 1920s, it was a social revolution. The concept was born of her observation that the rich were the most bored people on earth, paralyzed by their own decorum. Her solution was to force them to be active, to give them a ridiculous shared goal. Let's paint the scene. We are at a lavish dinner party in a grand Parisian apartment. The guest list is a marketer's dream, the Aga Khan III, a spiritual leader to millions and one of the world's richest men, Cole Porter, the witty American composer whose tunes were defining the decade, Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, a handful of French aristocrats and American millionaires. The dinner concludes. The guests expect the usual polite mingling. Instead, Elsa, beaming like a mad Roman emperor, stands and announces that they are all about to be divided into teams. They will be given a list of absurd and almost impossible to find objects and tasks, and the first team to return with everything on the list wins a prize, a cheap tin cup, adding to the joke. The lists she concocted were masterpieces of surrealist mischief. A team might be tasked with procuring a single red hair from the head of a specific famously bald ambassador, or bringing back a live sheep from the outskirts of the city, or getting a slipper from the famous dancer Miss Dinguette at the Folies Bergère in the middle of her performance, or one of her most famous convincing a gendarme at a specific intersection to part with one of his white gloves. Panic, confusion, and then a wave of delighted schoolyard excitement ripples through the room. Suddenly, these jaded, sophisticated citizens of the world are scrambling, plotting, and strategizing. Chauffeurs are summoned. Magnificent Hispano-Suizas and Rolls-Royces are soon roaring through the streets of Paris, their bejeweled occupants on a madcap quest. Imagine the sight. A duchess, draped in patu and pearls, leaning out of her car window, desperately trying to bribe a baker for a stale baguette. Picture a banking tycoon, a man who commanded fortunes, trying to sweet-talk a bemused concierge into letting him into a rival's apartment to borrow a specific lampshade. The scavenger hunt was a stroke of genius for several reasons. It shattered social barriers. On the hunt, a princess and a painter were just teammates. It was inherently dramatic and unpredictable. And most importantly, it was an adventure that created a shared memory. The next day, all of Paris was buzzing about it. The newspapers picked up the story, and Elsa Maxwell became an overnight sensation. She had given society a new game to play. She immediately followed this triumph with a relentless barrage of inventive parties, each designed to subvert expectations. There was the come as you are party, a concept born of pure disruptive mischief. Invitations would be dispatched by messenger at the most inconvenient of hours, 7 in the morning or perhaps midnight. The instructions were simple and terrifying. You must come to the party immediately, dressed in whatever you were wearing the moment the invitation arrived. This led to the glorious spectacle of Parisian high society gathering in a bizarre tableau of intimate disarray. Famous industrialists in their striped pajamas and silk dressing gowns made awkward conversation with celebrated beauties in their nightgowns and face cream. It was a brilliant leveling device, stripping away the armor of couture and forcing a raw, hilarious intimacy upon her guests. Then there was the murder mystery party, an idea she pioneered long before it became a popular dinner party trope. She would stage an elaborate whodunit in a sprawling country house or a grand apartment. An unlucky guest would be designated the victim and would dramatically die after the first course. Another guest would be secretly assigned the role of the murderer, while a third might be the detective. Clues, a blood-stained handkerchief, a cryptic note, a misplaced object, would be carefully planted. The rest of the evening would be spent in a delightful frenzy of accusation and deduction as the guests interrogated each other, trying to solve the crime. It was immersive theater, turning her guests from a passive audience into the cast of their own thrilling drama. Her genius for psychological gamesmanship was perhaps best displayed at her "Come as Someone Else" at the party ball. Each guest was secretly assigned the identity of another guest and had to impersonate them for the entire evening. Imagine the delicious social chaos as people tried to imitate their friends' and rivals' mannerisms, accents, and famous anecdotes, often with cruel accuracy. It was a funhouse mirror held up to her own social circle, a night of razor-sharp parody and social comedy that was both brilliant and slightly dangerous. Her creative energy found another home in Venice. In the 1920s, the Venice Lido was a sleepy, somewhat faded beach resort. Elsa arrived and, with her friend and creative partner Cole Porter, decided it was the perfect blank canvas. They essentially invented the modern concept of the glamorous beach resort. Elsa organized elaborate pajama parties on the sand, with orchestras playing on floating pontoons. She threw costume balls that lasted until dawn and organized chic beachside luncheons that became the talk of Europe. She made the Lido the summer destination for the international set, a place where you might see Winston Churchill building a sandcastle or Douglas Fairbanks doing cartwheels on the beach. Her partnership with Porter was a perfect fusion of talent. He wrote the witty, sophisticated soundtrack for the jazz age, and she directed its social theater. They were two clever, ambitious Midwesterners who had taken the old world by storm. By the 1930s, her fame was so great that she was lured back to America with an offer she couldn't refuse. The iconic Waldorf-Astoria Hotel in New York, the very pinnacle of the establishment, hired her to be their official hostess, their social ambassador. It was the ultimate irony. The woman who had made her name by dynamiting social conventions was now being paid by the ultimate institution to bring her unique brand of magic inside its hallowed walls. The outsider was finally the ultimate insider. She celebrated her return and her new reign by throwing some of the most legendary parties the city had ever seen, including her masterpiece of absurdity, the Barnyard Follies. She cemented her status not just as a party thrower, but as a media mogul with a syndicated column and a radio show that broadcast her gospel of fun across the nation. The girl from Keokuk had not just entered the Gilded Cage, she had completely redesigned it to her own specifications. We have spent our time so far marveling at the grand spectacle of Elsa Maxwell's life. We've witnessed her audacious climb, her revolutionary parties, her conquest of the world's most exclusive circles. We've seen the scavenger hunts, the barnyard follies, the endless parade of dukes and divas. But now we must pause. We must turn away from the glittering ballroom, dim the lights, and ask the most important question of all. Why? What was the engine that drove this relentless 50-year performance? What was the deep, insatiable hunger that could only be fed by a constant diet of laughter, music, and applause? To understand Elsa Maxwell, we have to look past the carefully constructed persona of the boisterous, ever-jovial hostess and find the woman within. And what we find is a study in the most fascinating contradictions. A woman who commanded legions, but craved true intimacy, who built a world of joyful inclusion but often felt like the ultimate outsider, and who, for all her public triumphs, wrestled with profound private vulnerabilities that shaped every party she ever threw. The most obvious and perhaps the most formative of these vulnerabilities was her physical appearance. Let's be unflinchingly honest, because Elsa herself always was. In a world that has always prized and commodified female beauty, Elsa Maxwell was, by her own cheerful admission, short, fat, and homely. She came of age during the era of the Gibson girl, that idealized image of feminine perfection with her swan-like neck, her impossibly tiny waist, and her demure, aristocratic features. She hit her stride during the age of the flapper, the boyish, slender, androgynous ideal. She reigned through the golden age of Hollywood, a time of sculpted, almost mythical screen goddesses. And through all of it, there was Elsa, 5 feet of solid, unapologetic plainness. In her brilliant memoir, she addressed the issue head-on with a line that was both a witty quip and the absolute cornerstone of her life's strategy. I was my own special passport to Social Security. Since I was not a beauty, I had to be a wit. This wasn't a throwaway line, it was the Maxwell doctrine. She understood with a pragmatism that was both heartbreaking and heroic that she could never compete on the established battlefield of feminine charm. So she simply refused to fight that war. She created a new one on a battlefield of her own choosing, where the weapons were intelligence, audacity, and an inexhaustible supply of ideas. Her entire persona was an act of magnificent overcompensation. Her voice was loud because she refused to be overlooked. Her gestures were grand because she insisted on taking up space. Her personality was overwhelming because she knew it had to be to eclipse the first visual impression people had of her. She was a perpetual motion machine, a whirlwind of energy, because she instinctively knew that if she ever stood still, she might become invisible. But this constant, draining performance took a psychological toll. Imagine the sheer effort required day after day, year after year, to be the most amusing, the most interesting, the most vital person in every room you enter. Imagine the quiet fear that if you have an off night, if the jokes don't land, if the energy flags for even a moment, the whole carefully constructed edifice might collapse. This brings us back to that devastatingly poignant confession she once made to a close friend. Picture the scene. The last of the limousines has purred away from the curb. The orchestra has packed up. The ballroom, just hours ago a symphony of laughter and light, is now a vast, silent cavern, littered with abandoned glasses and crushed flowers. And in the middle of it all sits Elsa, the queen in her empty court. It's in this moment she turns to her friend and says, with a weariness that cuts through all the bravado, "You know, sometimes I wonder if they truly like me or if they just like the party." That single sentence is the key that unlocks her entire emotional landscape. It reveals a deep-seated, lifelong insecurity, a chilling fear that her worth was not intrinsic, but functional. Was she loved, or was she merely useful? Was she a friend, or just a fabulously entertaining court jester for the rich and famous? It was a fear that haunted her. Friends would recall moments when, in the middle of a raucous gathering she was orchestrating, they would catch a fleeting expression of profound sadness or exhaustion on her face before the mask of jollity was quickly and expertly put back in place. Adding an entirely different and crucial layer of complexity to her personal story was her sexuality. Elsa Maxwell never married. She had no children. For decades, the public story, the one she carefully curated, was that she was a dedicated bachelorette, a woman too busy, too independent for the confines of romance and marriage. The reality, an open secret within her intimate circle, but now widely accepted by historians, is that she was a lesbian. Her life partner for over 50 years was a stylish, athletic Scottish sportswoman and singer sewing machine heiress named Dorothy Dickie Fellows Gordon. Dickie was, in many ways, Elsa's opposite. She was tall, slender, and quietly reserved. She had no interest in the limelight. She was the calm, stable anchor to Elsa's chaotic, glittering whirlwind. We cannot overstate what this meant in the context of her time. From the 1910s to the 1960s, homosexuality was deeply taboo, a subject of medical condemnation, religious proscription, and legal peril. A public revelation could lead to social ruin, blackmail, and utter ostracism. Elsa's entire public life, therefore, was a masterful high-wire act of concealment. She built her empire in the full glare of the public spotlight while carefully shielding the most important relationship of her life in the shadows. This constant need for discretion and performance in her private life undoubtedly informed her public one. It also helps to explain the fierce, almost maternal loyalty she showed to her friends. Denied the legitimacy of a conventional family, she created her own. Her guest lists weren't just about social climbing, they were about auditioning members for her chosen family, a sprawling international clan bound not by blood but by affection, shared experiences, and mutual loyalty. Her legendary friendship with the opera diva Maria Callas is the perfect case study in this fierce protective love. Elsa met Callas in the 1950s at a party in Venice. She was immediately captivated not just by the singer's once-in-a-generation talent, but by her raw, almost wounded vulnerability. In Callas, Elsa saw a kindred spirit. Here was another woman who did not fit the conventional mold of beauty, another ugly duckling who had been criticized for her appearance. Here was another supreme talent whose genius set her apart from mere mortals, often leaving her isolated and misunderstood. Elsa took Callas under her wing with the ferocity of a mother bear. She became her champion, her social sponsor, and one of her most trusted confidants in a world filled with sycophants and rivals. It was Elsa, in a move that would change the course of Callas's life, who introduced her to the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. The introduction took place, fittingly, at one of Elsa's lavish balls at the Lido in Venice. Elsa, a master social chemist, saw the explosive potential between the fiery, artistic diva and the crude, powerful tycoon. The affair that followed was one of the most famous and ultimately tragic of the 20th century, but through it all, Elsa remained a loyal, if sometimes concerned, friend to Callis. When the press and the notoriously vicious opera world turned on Callis, Elsa used her widely read newspaper column as a cudgel, defending her friend and savaging her critics. She offered Callis a safe harbor, a place where she was not just La Divina, but simply Maria. But this deep love for her friends could also manifest as a demanding, almost tyrannical possessiveness. She gave her loyalty unconditionally, but she expected the same in return. If she felt slighted, ignored, or betrayed, her wrath could be terrifying. She was a woman of immense warmth and generosity, but there was a core of steel within her, a survivor's instinct that demanded allegiance. She gave a great deal to her friends, but she also needed a great deal from them. She needed their presence, their laughter, their glamour to fill the vast, echoing spaces of her life. She once said, when asked why she put so much Herculean effort into her parties, a quote that strips away all the artifice. She didn't talk about fame or power or social climbing. She said simply, "It's to keep my friends from dying of boredom and to keep me from dying of loneliness." In that single stark sentence, you have the heart of Elsa Maxwell, the entire glittering, chaotic, fabulous enterprise, the scavenger hunts, the barnyard follies, the decades of being the world's most famous hostess, was at its core a magnificent and elaborate defense against the quiet, creeping terror of being alone. Every great reign, no matter how long or how absolute, must eventually face its challenger. For every Queen Elizabeth, there is a Mary, Queen of Scots. For every Napoleon, a Wellington. And for Elsa Maxwell, the magnificent, undisputed queen of mid-century society, the most brilliant and dangerous pretender to her throne, arrived in the form of a small, strange, and phenomenally gifted man with a voice like a querulous cat and a pen as sharp and deadly as a shard of glass. His name was Truman Capote. The epic feud that erupted between Elsa Maxwell and Truman Capote was something far more profound than a catty society spat recorded in the gossip columns. It was a generational war. It was a clash of fundamentally opposing philosophies. It was a bloody, public, and utterly captivating battle for the very soul of high society itself. It was the reigning champion, the bulldog, versus the cunning challenger, the viper. And it was spectacular. To truly understand the seismic nature of this conflict, you have to understand that they were both aiming for the exact same summit, but climbing entirely different faces of the mountain. They were, in many ways, perfect antagonists, a study in contrasting styles, methods, and motivations. First, the challenger. Truman Capote emerged on the New York scene in the late 1940s, a literary prodigy and a social phenomenon all in one. Physically, he was Elsa's opposite in every way. Where she was stout and solid, he was diminutive and elfin, with a shock of blonde hair and large, watchful eyes. Where her voice was a booming, room-filling baritone, his was a strange, high-pitched, lisping drawl that was both riveting and unsettling. He was a creature of calculated artifice, a flamboyant dandy who understood from a very young age that being interesting was a form of power. His literary fame, first with the Gothic novel Other Voices, Other Rooms, and later cemented with the luminous Breakfast at Tiffany's, was his golden ticket, the key that unlocked the doors to the world he longed to conquer. Now consider their methods, their grand strategies for social conquest. Elsa, as we've seen, was a maximalist, a general of mass mobilization. Her philosophy was rooted in the grand spectacle, the inclusive extravaganza. She was a practitioner of social alchemy, believing you could create gold by mixing the most disparate elements. Hollywood stars with stuffy aristocrats, brilliant artists with dull but rich industrialists. Her parties were exercises in joyful, controlled demolition, breaking down the walls of social stiffness through shared, often silly activities. She operated on the principle of addition, believing her power grew with the size and diversity of her guest list. She was the benevolent dictator of fun, a Cecil B. DeMille of the ballroom, directing epics with a cast of thousands. The goal was collective joy. Capote was the exact opposite. He was a minimalist, a precision surgeon. His method was the intimate conspiracy, the exclusive inner circle. He had no interest in entertaining the masses. He wanted to capture the queens. Over the years, he meticulously cultivated a small, fiercely elite group of the most beautiful, wealthy, and stylish women in the world. He called them his swans. These were women who set the international standard for taste and glamour. Barbara Babe Paley, the ethereally beautiful wife of the founder of CBS, considered the most elegant woman of her time. Nancy Slim Keith, the cool, sharp-tongued California girl who had married into British aristocracy. CZ Guest, the sporty blonde all-American aristocrat. And Gloria Guinness, the mysterious, impossibly chic Mexican-born socialite. These women were the goddesses of their world, and Capote made himself their high priest. His technique was a masterclass in seduction. He didn't throw giant parties for his swans. He became their most essential accessory. He was the perfect plus one, the provider of endlessly amusing gossip, the devoted confidant. He mastered the art of the long, boozy ladies' lunch at restaurants like La Côte Basque. He spent weeks with them on their yachts and at their sprawling estates. He was the recipient of their most intimate confessions, delivered over transatlantic phone calls in the dead of night. He listened, rapt, as they unburdened themselves of their deepest secrets, their husbands' infidelities, their children's transgressions, their private fears, their cruelest judgments of their supposed friends. He became their pet, their mascot, their living diary. And all the while, this brilliant, observant writer was filing it all away. He wasn't just collecting friends, he was collecting material. While Elsa was directing her epic, Capote was filming an intimate, psychologically ruthless documentary. The rivalry began, as these things often do, with small sniping remarks in the press. Elsa, representing the old guard, found Capote's fawning, parasitic relationship with his swans to be deeply distasteful. She saw him as a sycophant, a user, a dangerous social climber who lacked the fundamental decency she believed society required. In her widely read columns, she would make thinly veiled, dismissive jabs at that little toad or the Pekingese. Capote, in turn, saw Elsa as a relic. He found her brand of forced, boisterous fun to be old-fashioned, unsophisticated, and painfully middle class, the most devastating insult in his arsenal. He would quip in interviews that her parties were crushingly boring, and that she herself was little more than a professional fat lady paid to amuse the rich. Their feud became a public performance, a running drama for the amusement of the very society they were fighting over. New York began to divide itself into two camps. Were you Team Elsa, a believer in the old code of gracious, if loud, entertaining? Or were you Team Truman, captivated by the allure of his modern cynical wit and his proximity to the impossibly chic swans? One can only imagine the tension at a restaurant like the Colony when both were present, holding court at their respective tables. the air between them crackling with a silent, mutual contempt. But the final devastating act of this drama would take place long after Elsa had left the stage. She died in 1963, her reign secure. Capote's, however, was destined for a spectacular, self-inflicted implosion. For years, he had been talking about his magnum opus, a novel to be called Answered Prayers. It was to be his masterpiece, an American equivalent to Proust's In Search of Lost Time, a book that would pull back the curtain and expose the scandalous, secret-filled lives of the super-rich. His friends, the Swans, were both nervous and thrilled. They knew he was writing about their world, but they assumed he would disguise it, fictionalize it, protect them. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. In November 1975, Esquire magazine published a long excerpt from the unfinished novel. The chapter was titled La Côte Basque, 1965, named after their favorite restaurant. It was not a work of fiction. It was a transcription. It was a literary hand grenade thrown directly into the drawing rooms of his closest friends. In prose that was as beautiful as it was cruel, Capote laid bare their most humiliating and shocking secrets. He told the story of the messy affair of one Swan's husband, using details that could only have come from her own tearful confessions. Most devastatingly, he retold the story of Anne Woodward, a social climber who had shot and killed her wealthy husband in what was officially ruled a hunting accident, but what society had always whispered was murder. Capote, through a character clearly based on one of his Swans, presented the murder theory as cold, hard fact. The day the magazine hit the newsstands, Anne Woodward committed suicide. The fallout for Capote was a social apocalypse. It was instantaneous and absolute. Babe Paley, the woman he claimed to love more than anyone, never spoke to him again. Slim Keith, CZ guest Gloria Guinness, all of them, his beloved Swans, cut him off completely and irrevocably. The phone calls stopped. The invitations ceased. The doors of the world he had worked so painstakingly to enter were slammed shut, locked, and bolted in his face forever. He had committed the one unforgivable sin of their tribe. He had told the truth. He had broken the sacred code of silence. In the wreckage of Capote's social life, Elsa Maxwell received her ultimate posthumous vindication. She had warned them all. She had called him a viper. And now, finally, the viper had sunk its fangs into the very hands that had fed it champagne and stroked its head. Her philosophy, which may have seemed quaintly old-fashioned, was revealed to be the essential bedrock of their world. The purpose of society, in her view, was to create a pleasant, protective illusion. Capote had shattered that illusion for the sake of his art. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought his friends loved him for his genius. They had not. They had loved him for his amusing companionship, and that love was conditional on his absolute discretion. The moment he violated that trust, he was no longer a friend. He was a traitor. The war was over. The bulldog, even from the grave, had won. The feud remains a brutal cautionary tale about the true nature of power, friendship, and betrayal in a world where secrets are the most valuable and dangerous currency of all. By the late 1950s, the world Elsa Maxwell had so expertly commanded was beginning to change. The arrival of rock and roll, a new jet set chronicled by paparazzi, and the rise of television celebrity created a culture that was faster and less formal. The grand theatrical parties she had perfected started to feel like relics of a bygone era. When she died in 1963 at the age of 80, it was mourned as the definitive end of an age. Yet to dismiss her as a simple party thrower is to fundamentally misunderstand her impact. Her true legacy is a formidable tapestry woven from cultural innovation and the profound art of human connection. Professionally, she was the godmother of the modern event and public relations industries. Before Elsa, high society gatherings were predictable and governed by rigid protocol. She dynamited that formula, injecting her parties with narrative theater and playful anarchy. Her scavenger hunts, murder mystery dinners, and psychologically clever costume balls were revolutionary concepts that transformed a gathering into a memorable, immersive experience, the very foundation of the experience economy that thrives today. Her cultural impact was even more profound. Elsa was the key architect of our modern celebrity culture, accomplishing this by deliberately demolishing the wall separating society, aristocrats, and old money from celebrity, actors, artists, and performers. At her parties, she created a radical cocktail of guests, forcing a duke to converse with a movie star and a tycoon to charm an opera singer. This intentional cross-pollination of birth, wealth, and talent created a potent new form of glamour and is now the absolute bedrock of the celebrity landscape, from the Met Gala to the Vanity Fair Oscar party. This achievement was also a testament to her power as a quintessential symbol of self-invention. She stands as a female Jay Gatsby who, unlike Gatsby, actually succeeded, starting with no inherited wealth, conventional beauty, or social standing. She masterfully built her own empire on wit and will alone, making her a radical feminist figure in an era that offered women few paths to independent power. This brings us back to the sharp, cruel observation from her rival, Truman Capote, that her parties were meaningless. In truth, he missed the bigger picture. The meaning of Elsa Maxwell's life wasn't found in any single ephemeral event, but in the cumulative effect of a 50-year mission to purposefully engineer human connection. Her magnificent, lifelong performance was a powerful and triumphant defense against her own private demons of loneliness and insecurity. She created a universe designed to banish boredom and loneliness because those were her own mortal enemies. Her life's novel wasn't meaningless. Its theme was the profound and essential human need for fellowship and joy. Ultimately, she reminds us that the desire to gather together against the darkness, to share a story, and to feel for a few precious hours that we are not alone is one of our deepest impulses.